ओम श्री चिन्मय सद्गुरवे नमः। हरि ओम। श्रीमद् भगवद गीता चैप्टर 3, commentary written by Param Poojya Gurudev Swami Chinmayananda ji. The Karma Yoga introduction. So far, Shri Krishna vehemently argued against Arjuna's decision not to fight but to renounce the glory of success and retire to the quietude of the jungle to live there the life of a monk seeking the divine. In his arguments, at one moment, the Lord advised that Arjuna's duty was to work without getting himself preoccupied with its result. Krishna had also warned him, "Let not thy attachment be toward inaction." Later on, the chapter concludes, chapter 55th verse to 72nd verse, with the inspired advocacy of the path of knowledge. Naturally, like any sincere student, Arjun felt confused as to which of the paths he was to follow for his self-development. The Vedantic philosophy of India is taught to the student during an intimate and free discussion between the teacher and the taught. In no other religion in the world do we find so much freedom allowed to the disciple to ask freely and openly, to contradict and to argue with his teachers. Vedanta, being a complete and exhaustive science of religion, the great rishis never bypassed the intellect of their disciples by appealing to their blind faith or insisting upon their abject devotion. The masters of old encouraged doubts and invited discussions. It is during these discussions that the student wrestled with the teacher in the arena of the intellect, and in this exercise he became spiritually stronger and perfectly agile in all the other layers of his personality. This Upanishadic style has been beautifully preserved and artistically employed by the great poet philosopher Vyasa in his Gita. Any student sincerely following up the second chapter with an irresistible appetite to live and enjoy the perfections pointed out must necessarily entertain such a doubt as Arjun expresses at the opening of this chapter. In fact, the arguments raised by Krishna in his discourse create in us a grave doubt as to what exactly is that path which will take a seeker easily to the realization of the Absolute in him. Is it A, knowledge, B, action, or C, both together practiced in a synthesis, or lastly D, is it through a total renunciation of both? Such a doubt can come, as I have already said, only to a seeker who has the enthusiasm to live the life indicated earlier. According to Shankara, action and renunciation are advised in the Vedas for a seeker to pursue serially. Ordinarily, no doubt, no living creature endowed with a mind and intellect can remain, even for a moment, of his wakeful conscious existence without doing some work or the other. Cessation of all activities is the signature of death upon insentient matter. Therefore, act we must from birth to death. Instinctively, in our inborn ignorance, we act motivated by our ego and egocentric desires. An uncultivated man acts thoughtlessly, propelled by his own wrong tendencies, ordering for himself ever a new lease of sorrowful existence. Entertaining these sensuous desires, he acts in the world seeking joy and earning for himself fleeting happiness, endless sorrows, and inexhaustible mental impressions, vasanas. These vasanas invite new fields for exhaustion through their free expressions in action. Naturally, the way out from this non stop vicious circle of ego motivated action, which creates vasanas and they demand more fields to exhaust themselves, wherein the individual again fattens his ego and comes to entertain fresh sets of desires in the path of right action. God dedicated selfless actions performed in a spirit of devotion and self surrender exhaust the existing vasanas and do not create of their own accord any more fresh tragic impressions, which in their turn would order fresh fields of activities. In the limited concept of life in the Vedic period, work, karma meant only the ritualistic sacrifices. These activities, pursued for a sufficiently long period, purified the heart, meaning integrated the personality and brought about a single pointedness of mind in the individual. It is obvious that such a conditioned and steadied mind alone could successfully apply itself on the path of self inquiry and come to rediscover the self, the divine soul. The Gita was written as an answer to an urgent demand in the time of Vyasa. The old traditional thoughts became stereotyped and lifeless. Dead phrases and cliches cannot nourish a culture. Thus, through the Gita, Krishna is made to give out a reinterpretation of the Vedic truths in the context of his time and in the language of the world in which he himself happened to live. Arjun, a warrior in the battlefield, is facing an army which is championing a cause at once immoral and foul. At this moment, for his spiritual evolution, which no doubt has been fully accepted as the goal of existence, it is not possible for him to indulge in ritualism unless he deserts his post of duty. If ritualism alone was the path, all people at all times would never be able to employ themselves for the highest goal of life. In the Gita, therefore, we have an expansion of the idea that indicated in the Vedas. Krishna, in his divine declaration, gives the sanction that any action can be a glorious sacrifice if only it is undertaken in the with the required purity of motive, with a spirit of surrender, and with the deep emotion of love. Apart from the glory of the Gita, as a book of original contribution, inaugurating a development upon the Vedic technique, This chapter, with its opening query from Arjuna, vividly pictures his psychological confusion. We have noticed the psychosis into which Arjun had sunk. Defining a patient of psychosis, modern psychology says the psychotic person loses his contact with reality. He may live in a dream world, perhaps unaware of his identity or surroundings, or he may be unable to control his behavior. He may have fantastic ideas, delusions. He may misinterpret what he sees or hears, illusions. He may see, hear, feel, taste, or smell things that are not there, hallucinations. Even though the patient Arjun, a victim of his own delusions, illusions, and hallucinations, had completely surrendered to the divine wisdom of his friend, Lord Krishna. The words of his charioteer were not fully appreciated by him all at once. His mind was so much overwhelmed by sorrow that he could not decide upon the right line of action. He had at first resolved not to fight the mean fratricidal war and had vigorously marshalled a set of seemingly impressive arguments in support of his decision. Therefore, Arjun is still and naturally too partial to his own decision. All through the second chapter, Arjun's intellect was trying to follow closely the arguments of Krishna, mainly to find fault with them if he could, or at least to seek in them some support for his own decisions. Krishna's arguments seemed to the preoccupied intellect of his friend equivocal and vague. To Arjun, in his consummate prejudice against everything that comes as a challenge to his own decisions, Krishna's discourse was not clear. At one place, the Lord indicated that karma was inferior to buddhi, but in the same discourse, in its conclusion, there was a vehement support of the path of renunciation. Arjun was all the time seeking a confirmation that his cowardice was a noble emotion to be applauded and appreciated, commended and supported by his friend and philosopher Krishna. But unfortunately, he could not discover in the Lord's words any direct declaration supporting his own viewpoint. But there was some direct, some indirect circumstantial evidence indicated that Arjun's decision to desert his post of duty was noble and glorious. Did not the Lord elaborate upon the glory of the man of steady wisdom? Arjuna means to say, this is exactly what I wanted, but at the same time, in the same discourse, Arjuna had been pushed to the front, commissioning him to face the enemies, to take up arms and fight the bloody war. Under these circumstances, it is but natural that Arjun should confront his charioteer with this direct question as to why he confuses him with self contradictory advice. अर्जुन उवाच जायसि चेत् कर्मणस्ते मता बुद्धिर्जनार्दन तत्किं कर्मणि घोरे मां नियोजयसि केशव. Arjuna said, this is first verse, if it be thought by you that knowledge is superior to action, O Janardhan, why then do you, O Keshav, engage me in this terrible action? Arjun still believes that to fight against his cousins, teachers and grandfathers is a terrible, ghor action. He seems to have forgotten, or got to have understood at all, or not to have understood at all. Krishna's words in the last chapter. Keshava had therein explained and clearly indicated that the Mahabharata war was not Arjun's attempt to murder any of his cousins or teachers. Arjun cannot have any individual personality in any army. It was a war. In a war, the two armies fight, and it represents the clash of two ideologies. The Pandavas were convinced of the moral purity, the spiritual worth, and the divine glory of their standpoint in the eminent test of strength. But unfortunately, Arjun could not sink his egoism and see himself totally identified with the army, championing the cause of the good. To the degree he could not identify himself with the cause, to that extent he nourished a self centered, egoistic vanity, and therefore his moral puritanism is in fighting the war. Arjun means to say that Krishna's arguments were supporting the path of renunciation, and yet they included an advice to Krishna, to Arjun, to undertake the great and terrible path of action. Moreover, व्यामिश्रेणेव वाक्येन बुद्धिं मोहयसीव मे तदेकं वद निश्चित्य येन श्रेयोऽहमाप्नुयाम्. Second verse. With this apparently perplexing speech you confuse, as it were, my understanding. Therefore tell me that one way by which I for certain may attain the highest. Suffering from his own delusions as he was, Arjun, intellectually an average man, had not in himself that amount of subtle philosophical acumen to discriminate between the subtle arguments and grasp for himself whether the path of action or the way of knowledge was the direct approach to the infinite, the eternal. His question concludes, therefore, with a humble request, tell me that one path by which I for certain can attain the highest. As a child of that age, there was no doubt even in Arjun's mind that life was not to be squandered away in merely producing, acquiring, hoarding, and spending wealth. As a true child of Hinduism, he vaguely knew that he had to fulfill a great cultural mission in the world, and that material successes were only the means and not the end or the goal. Partha's doubt was only to how best he could make use of the environments that presented themselves to him, so that he might carve out for himself a greater cultural growth and a fuller spiritual unfoldment in himself. The Blessed Lord gives the following reply, which is in conformity with the question. Shri Bhaganuvacha Lokesmin Dvividha Nishtha Pura Prokta Maya Nagha Jnana Yogena Sankhyanam Karma Yogena Yoginam. Verse 3. In this world there is a twofold path, as I said before, O sinless one, the path of knowledge of the Sankhyans and the path of action of the Yogins. To consider the path of action, Karma Yoga, and the path of knowledge, Jnana Yoga, as competitive to is to understand neither of them. They, being complementary, are to be practiced serially one after the other, selfless activity gives a chance to the mind to exhaust many of its existing mental impressions. Thus, purified, the mind gains such a light and ethereal poise that it can steadily soar into the subtlest realms of meditation and finally come to gain the experience of the transcendental absolute. Men belonging to foreign cultures find it very difficult to understand Hinduism when they approach it with all their native enthusiasm. They feel overwhelmed when they read of such a variety of paths and seemingly contradictory advices. But to condemn Hinduism as unscientific because of this would be a mistake as colossal and as ludicrous as to say that medicine is no science at all, since for each patient the same doctor prescribes a different medicine during a single afternoon. Religious men fit for spiritual discipline, fall under two distinct categories, the active and the contemplative. Temporarily, temperamentally, these two classes fall so widely apart that to prescribe for both of them one and the same technique for individual development would be to discourage one section and ignore its progress. The Gita is not merely a textbook of Hinduism, but a Bible of humanity. As such, in its universal application, it has to show methods of self development to suit the mental and intellectual temperaments of both these categories. Therefore, Krishna clearly explains here that the twofold path of self development was prescribed for the world, the path of knowledge and to the meditative, and the path of action to the active. It is added that this classification and careful prescription for the two different types of men has been in existence from the very beginning of creation. For the first time, Lord Krishna is giving us here in this stanza a glimpse of the identity of the man who is the author of the Gita. If it were given out by the son of Devaki, a mere mortal who lived in that age, he would at best have given us only an intellectual theory built entirely upon the observed data. Observed data always have a knack of changing, and when they change, the final conclusions also must necessarily change. We have now 100 different political and economic philosophies and numberless scientific theories that have all become outmoded when the social living conditions, the economic structure, or the collected and observed data have changed in their setup or in their imperative messages. If the Gita was the conclusion of a mere mortal Krishna's intellect, the values of life preached therein would also have got automated and by now become fossilized. Here, he clearly says that at the very beginning of creation, these two paths were prescribed by me, thereby indicating that Krishna is talking here not as the blue boy of Vrindavan, not as the beloved of the gopis, not as the great diplomat of his age, but as a man of realization, a prophet, and a seer who lived in that for a period of Indian history. It is neither an Arjun's charioteer, nor as a friend, nor as a well-wisher of the Pandavas that he is talking at this moment, perfectly identifying with the spiritual dignity in himself, experiencing his absolute nature. It is as the eternal substratum for the entire pluralistic world, as the cause of all creation, as the might in all substances that he is talking now. Transcending all time and causation, in a burning conviction that of the lived truth. He declares here, at the very beginning of creation, these two paths were given out by me as the two possible methods by which the active and the contemplative could seek and rediscover the eternal nature of their very self. The path of action is a means to an end, not directly, but only as a preparation to the path of knowledge. Whereas the latter, which is attained by means of the path of action, leads to the goal directly without extraneous help. To show this, the Lord says, न कर्मणामनारम्भान् नैष्कर्म्यं पुरुषोऽश्नुते न च सन्न्यसनादेव सिद्धिं समधिगच्छति. Verse number 4. Not by a non-performance of action does man reach actionlessness, nor by mere renunciation does he attain perfection. Spiritually, as the self, every one of us is all full and perfect. Due to our ignorance of this spiritual experience, we entertain in our intellect unending desires, each of them being our own intellect's attempt to fulfill itself. It is very well known that we desire things that are not already with us in full or in a satisfying quantity. As the desires in us, so are our thoughts. Thoughts are the disturbances created in our mental zone by our desires. At every moment, the texture and quality of our thoughts are directly conditioned and controlled by our desires. Thoughts in an individual expressed in the outer world of objects become his actions. Actions are nothing other than the actor's thoughts projected and expressed in the world. Thus, in this chain of ignorance constituted of desires, thoughts, and actions, each one of us is caught and bound. If we observe them a little more closely, we find that these are not so many different factors but are, in fact, different expressions of one and the same spiritual ignorance. This ignorance, avidya, when it functions in the intellect, expresses itself as desires. When the desires, which are nothing other than the ignorance, function in the mental zone, they express themselves as thoughts. These thoughts, when they express in the outer world, become actions. Naturally, therefore, in the Supreme can be defined if the Supreme can be defined as the experience beyond ignorance, it must necessarily be true that the self is the nature of desirelessness, or the condition of thoughtlessness, or the life of actionlessness. By mere renunciation of action, sannyasa, no one attains perfection. Running away from life is not the way to reach the highest goal of evolution. Arjun's intention, you may remember, what was to run away from the war front, and therefore this misguided Hindu was to be re-educated, re-educated in the right understanding of the immortal culture of the Vedas. For this purpose was the divine song given out by Krishna. Through action to a purification of the inner instrument, applying which the seeker walks the path of knowledge to reach ultimately the spiritual destination of self development, is indicated in this stanza. Hence, it has been often quoted by all great writers on Hinduism. For what reason, then, does a person not attain perfection that is free from activities by mere renunciation, unaccompanied by knowledge? The reason thus asked for is given as follows. Nahi kaschit kshanamapi jatu tishthatya karma krit कार्यते ह्यवशः कर्म सर्वः प्रकृतिजैर्गुणैः. Verse number 5. Verily, none can ever remain even for a moment without performing action, for everyone is made to act helplessly, indeed by the qualities born of Prakriti. Man is ever agitated under the influence of the triple tendencies of inactivity sattva, activity rajas, and inactivity tamas inherent in him. Even for a single moment, he cannot remain totally inactive. Total inactivity is the character of utterly insentient matter. Even if we are physically at rest, mentally and intellectually we are active all the time, except during the state of deep sleep. So long as we are under the influence of these three mental tendencies, gunas, we are helplessly prompted to labor and to act. Therefore, not to act at all is to disobey the laws of nature, which shall, as we all know, bring about a cultural deterioration in ourselves. If there is a creature that remains inactive physically, he will get dissipated in his thoughts. Therefore, the Gita advises him to act vigorously with a right attitude of mind so that he may avoid all internal waste of energy and learn to grow in himself. Now, for him who knows not the self, it is not right to neglect the duty enjoined on him. So the Lord says, कर्मेन्द्रियाणि संयम्य यास्ते मनसा स्मरन् इन्द्रियार्थान् विमूढात्मा मिथ्याचारस्य उच्यते. Verse number 6. He who, restraining the organs of action, sits thinking in his mind of the sense objects, he of deluded understanding, is called a hypocrite. To sit back physically retired is not the way to reach anywhere, much less the final state of perfection. If this physical retirement is not efficiently accompanied by an equal amount of mental and intellectual withdrawal from the sensuous fields, the spiritual future of such a misinformed seeker is surely very bleak and dreary. The truth of this statement is very well supported by modern textbooks on psychology. To dissipate ourselves in immoral and criminal thoughts is more harmful than to physically indulge in them. The mind has a tendency to repeat its own thoughts. When a single thought is repeated off and on, it creates in the mind a deepening impression, and afterwards, all thoughts arising in the mind irresistibly flow in that prepared channel. Once the direction of the flow in the mind has become fixed, all external activities of that individual become colored by this characteristic tendency. A mind that constantly meditates on sensuous pleasures carves out for itself a deep sensuous tendency, and ere long we discover that the individual is helplessly egged on to act in the external world as he had tragically planned for himself in his mind. To give physically a show of mortality and ethics while mentally living a shameless life of low motives and foul sentiments is the occupation of a man who is not a seeker of spiritual fulfillment, but, as is termed here, a self deluded hypocrite. Certainly, we all know that even if we can physically discipline ourselves, it is not easy for an average man to control the sensuous tendencies at his mental level. Krishna realizes that an ordinary man would not know how to save himself from this natural instinct, and therefore he prescribes the following stanza. यस्त्विन्द्रियाणि मनसा नियम्यारभतेऽर्जुन कर्मेन्द्रियैः कर्मयोगमसक्तः स विशेषते. Verse number 7. But whosoever controlling the senses by the mind, O Arjun, engages his organs of action in karma yoga without attachment, he excels. In these two innocent looking lines, we have the entire science of right action and a complete technique of right living. The economics of thought is a science unknown to the modern world, while the thought economists of yore carved out a Rishi India that and guided the country to the golden era of its spiritual culture. The mind is fed and sustained, nurtured and nourished by the five organs of perception, with stimuli drawn from the outer world of sense objects. The mind in us, as it were, flows out through the sense organs, and when it comes in contact with their respective objects, the sense organs perceive them. If the mind is not cooperating with the sense organs, perception is impossible, even though the objects may be within the field of the organs. That is why sometimes, when we are deeply attentive and fully interested in reading a book, we do not hear even when somebody calls us at our elbow. Examples can be multiplied. The prescription contained in this stanza asks a seeker to control the sense organs by the mind. This can be effectively achieved only when the mind is given a brighter and diviner field to roam about in. To control the impetuosity of the mind, which sheer will is like an attempt to dam a river while it is in flood. It is destined to be a futile attempt. Later on, the Gita will explain the technique of this control. This control of the sense organs by the mind is only the negative aspect of the entire technique of right living. Ordinarily, we spend a lot of our life energies in the fields of sense objects. When the sense organs are thus controlled, we are conserving a large quantity of energy, and unless this gathered energy is immediately given a more profitable field of activity, it is sure to break the bounds and flood the inner world and perhaps sweep away the entire personality equilibrium. The second line of this stanza advises us why we should do what we should do with the energies that thus saved from their usual fields of dissipation. The stanza says that these energies must be spent in directing the seeker's organs of action to the appropriate fields of activities. Even here, a very important precaution has been lovingly advised by Krishna. The Karma Yogin has been warned to act with perfect detachment. When a camera is loaded with a piece of plain white paper, however long we may keep the lenses open against any well lit object, no impression of the object concerned can dirty the paper. On the other hand, if that very same sheet of paper is sensitized, then even a slight exposure will leave the impressions of the object upon it. Similarly, a mind plastered with attachment soon gathers on to itself impressions, vasanas, during its contacts in the external fields of activity. The Lord advises us to act without attachment so that instead of gathering new impressions, we may make use of our activities for the exhaustion of the existing vasana dirt in our mental equipment. The logical and scientific exposition of this theory is so complete that no student of the Gita can discover it can discover in it any loopholes for hesitation or doubt. By withdrawing the organs of perception from their unprofitable fields of activity, we save on the inner energy which is spent through the organs of activity on a chosen field of work because of our inner attitude of non attachment during the activity. No new rubbish is gathered by our mind, but on the contrary, it gets itself burnished by the removal of its existing mental dirt. The very field of activity, which ordinarily becomes a snare to capture and imprison a soaring soul, itself becomes the exact art of self liberation when it is rightly employed by faithfully following the way of life advised in the Gita. Wherefore, नियतं कुरु कर्म त्वं कर्मजायो कर्मणः शरीरयात्रापि च ते न प्रसिद्धेद कर्मणः. Verse number 6. You perform your bounden duty, for action is superior to inaction. Even the maintenance of the body would not be possible by you by inaction, for you by inaction. In our workaday world, we must understand this term bounden duty, niyatam karma, in the text to include all obligatory actions of an individual in his home, in his office, and in the society as a national being. Thus, not to perform diligently all our duties in the home and in the world outside would be inaction. We are warned that even a healthy bodily existence is not possible if we were to live in complete inertia and inactivity. Inactivity brings about the destruction of the nation, of the society, and of the home, and often the very individual himself becomes victimized by his own idleness and suffers physical debilities and intellectual deterioration. It is also wrong to suppose that actions lead to bondage and that they should not therefore be performed. Why? यज्ञार्थात् कर्मणोऽन्यत्र लोकोऽयं कर्मबन्धनः तदर्थं कर्म कौन्तेय मुक्तसङ्गः समाचर. Verse number 9. The world is bounded by actions other than those performed for the sake of sacrifice. Do thou, therefore, O son of Kunti, perform action for that sake, for yajna alone, free from all attachments. Every action does not bring about bondage upon the doer. It is only unintelligent activities that thicken the impressions in the mind and thus successfully build a thick and impenetrable wall between the egocentric and the unlimited divine spark of life in us. Every action motivated by egocentric desires thickens the veil and permits not even a single ray of the essential divinity to peep through it, to illumine the life in us. According to the traditional translation All activities other than the yajna activities will bring about vasana bondages, and the individual's ultimate development and growth will be arrested. Yajna here means any self sacrificing work undertaken in a spirit of self dedication for the blessings of all. Such an action cannot be self degrading, and therefore it is self liberating. The following stanza also will become more and more clear and universally appropriate in their meaning only when we understand yajna as any social, communal, national, or personal activity into which the individual is ready to pour himself forth entirely in a spirit of service and dedication. Only when people come forward to act in a spirit of cooperation and self dedication can the community get itself freed from its shackles of poverty and sorrow. This is a fact endorsed by history, and such activities can be undertaken in a spirit of divine loyalty only when the worker has no attachment. Arjun's defect was that he got too attached to the individuals in the opposing forces, and he developed consequently wrong relationships with them. Therefore, he came to feel that he must run away from the field of work that had presented itself before him. For the following reasons also, action should be done by him who is qualified for it. सह यज्ञाः प्रजा सृष्ट्वा पुरोवाच प्रजापतिः अनेन प्रसवेश्यध्वं मेषवोस्त्विष्टकामधुक्. Verse number 10. The Prajapati, the Creator, having in the beginning of creation created mankind together with sacrifices, said, by this shall you prosper, let this be the milk cow of your desire, Kamaduk, the mythological cow which yields all desired objects. Even when the Creator, the total mind, puts up the show of the universe of the five elements and brings forth the living organisms along with man on this stage of life to work, to strive and to achieve, he creates also yajna, the spirit of self-dedicated activities. The yajna spirit is seen everywhere. The sun shines, the moon appears, the sea throbs, the earth bears, all in a spirit of sacrifice and self-dedicated motherly love, with never even a trace of attachment or any kind of self-arrogating motive. The whole world of cosmic powers and nature's phenomena function instinctively in the service of all. Even before life could appear on the face of the earth, the elemental forces have prepared the field with their constant activities performed in the sacred spirit of dedication. Even when life developed and multiplied at all levels, we can easily recognize different degrees of yajna activities which keep up the harmonious growth of existence. The above idea, when poetically put, becomes this pregnant stanza in the Gita. The Creator created the world along with the spirit of service and the capacity for sacrifice. As it were, the Creator declared, by this spirit of self-sacrifice shall you multiply. This shall be the milk cow of your desires. Kamedanu is a mythological cow supposed to have belonged to sage Vasishtha, from which all our desires could be milked out. The term, therefore, means only that no achievement is impossible for man if he knows how to act in the discipline of cooperation and if he is ready to bring forth into his activities the required amount of in his activities. Hmm, into his activities the required amount of non-attachment and spirit of sacrifice. How can this be achieved by sacrifice? देवान् भावयतानेन ते देवा भावयन्तु वः परस्परं भावयन्तः श्रेयः परमवाप्स्यथ. Verse number 11. With this you do nourish the gods, and may those devas nourish you. Thus, nourishing one another, you shall attain the highest good. The whole Vedic concept of devas is that of one universal power, ever active in the world of phenomena, receiving appropriate names because of its multiple functions. All Vedic gods are but functional names of the one supreme creative power manifesting in myriad forms. In understanding the stanza in its more universal application, we have to interpret the term Deva as the very presiding deity in any field of activity, who blesses the worker in that field with his profit. The deity that blesses the worker in a field of activity can be nothing other than the productive potential in that given field. When we apply in any situation our true and sincere work, the efforts and sacrifices so made, as it were, invoke the productive potential in that situation, which comes to manifest and bless the worker. This being obvious when we try to understand that we in the modern world mean when we say Mother India. In thus symbolizing the might of a nation, we mean the productive potential of that country in all her spheres of activities. It is obvious that the productivity that is dormant in any situation can be invoked only by man's sincere efforts. This potential, which generally lies dormant everywhere, is the Deva to be cherished by the worker through the yajna activities, and certainly the Deva will manifest itself to cherish or to bless the worker. Thus, cherishing one another, man shall gain the highest good, is the divine intention in the mind of the Creator, says Krishna in this stanza. The law of seva is faithfully followed by every sentiment and every sentient and insentient member of the cosmos instinctively. Man alone is given the freedom to act as he likes, and to the extent he disobeys this universal law of sacrifice. Yajna, to that extent he becomes law of sacrifice, yajna. To that extent he comes to suffer because he, with his arrogant and egoistic actions, brings discord in the harmony of the existence around him. Moreover, इष्टान् भोगान् हि वो देवा दास्यन्ते यज्ञभाविताः तैर्दत्तानप्रदायैभ्यो यो भुङ्क्तेस्तेन एव सः. And verse number 12. The devas, nourished by the sacrifice, will give you the desired objects. Indeed, he who enjoys objects given by the devas without offering in return to them is verily a thief. Here, Krishna repeats the unalterable ritualistic law that the Devas cherished by Yajna will provide us with the desired objects. The truth of this statement becomes self evident and clear when we reread this statement, substituting our meaning for the term Deva and Yajna. The productive potential Deva, when cherished through self dedicated work performed in a spirit of sacrifice, Yajna, will provide the worker with the desired objects. This is the law of life. And when we thus earn a profit due to our sacrifices, we have every right to enjoy that profit sharing among ourselves. But no living creature should enjoy benefits of others' actions without contributing his own share to the total effort. In the capitalistic system of life, we notice the wrong tendency of self aggrandizement of profits produced out of the collective efforts of millions of workers. This ultimately creates sad maladjustments in all spheres of activity, and national and international peace is threatened when we thus upset the law of harmony in life. When this idea, familiar in modern finance, that a member of a society who consumes without producing is a liability to the nation, is reread in the language of the Vedas, it is spelt as the second line of this stanza. He who enjoys objects given by the Devas, the productive potential tapped without offering his own yajna efforts into it, is termed here by Krishna as a social thief, considering the moral and ethical idealism recognized and respected at the time of the Gita. The term thief used here is indeed a powerful word, fully implying the low depravity, depravity and disgraceful nature of such a social criminal who eats without producing. यज्ञशिष्टाशिनः सन्तो मुच्यन्ते सर्वकिल्बिषैः भुञ्जते ते त्वकं पापा ये पचन्त्यात्मकारणात्. On the other hand, verse number 13, the righteous who eat the remnants of the sacrifice are freed from all sins, but those sinful ones who cook food only for their own sake verily eat but sin. As a contrast to such social criminals feeding themselves upon the social wealth in producing which they have not brought in any self effort, in this stanza we have the good who receive for themselves their share after sweating hard in sincere yajna activities. Such people, as explained here, go beyond all sins. Sins of the past are the causes for the present pains, and the present sins would be the causes for the future sorrows. Thus, all causes for the sorrows in social life would no doubt be removed if the good and socially conscious members of a community were to feel satisfied in enjoying the remnants of their cooperative work performed in the true yajna spirit. As a contrast to this, it has been declared that those who cook food for themselves alone eat but sin. It seems that Krishna is perfectly against private property, not in the sense in which a communist would understand it. Krishna seems to be against the principle of arrogation that sets that wheel Anjanya. Therefore, the all pervading Brahman, God principle, ever rests in sacrifice. The cosmic wheel of cooperative action is being narrated here in the familiar language of the Vedas. The living creatures are born out of food and they are nourished by food. The mineral wealth of the world becomes assimilable food, both as vegetarian and non vegetarian, only by the action of rain upon it. But for rains, the vegetables will not grow, and the lack of proper grazing grounds is a danger to cattle wealth. Rains come as a result of yajna, and yajnas are performed through human action. This stanza may appear strange to those who are not ready to bring the full shaft of their intelligence for the purpose of understanding it. It is evident to any modern educated man that living creatures are born out of matter. Matter is rendered consumable and digestible, nutritive and assimilable only by the action of rains upon it. But the difficulty in understanding the stanza is when we come to the next assertion that the rains come as a result of yajnas. But in Krishna's words here, we are not warranted in accepting that he is advising Arjun to follow ritualism. In this stanza, as also elsewhere, all along the Gita, the familiar term of the Vedic period has been charged with new meanings and significances. Rain is the essential condition for the conversion of the mineral raw material into enjoyable and nutritive food. Similarly, in all fields of activity, there is an enjoyable profit which can be gathered only when the fields come under conditions favorable for them to produce those profits. Self-dedicated activities, yajna, when performed in any given field of endeavor, will be creating therein conditions necessary for the field of smile forth rain in the luxurious crop of profit, annam, enjoyable by the society. For example, the wasteful waters of a river flowing idly can be dammed and made use of if the waters are intelligently employed in irrigating the fertile lands now lying fallow on its banks. Through sacrifice and work alone can the dam be built, and when it is built, it provides conditions helpful for bringing the lands on either side under the plough. Again, for making use of irrigated land, man has yet to strive, plowing, sowing, weeding, waiting, gathering, before he can come to enjoy the profit of his activities, the food. We are shown how this wheel of action in stanza 15 is connected with and includes the Supreme, the principle of right action, nay, even the power to act has come out of the Creator Himself, and the Creator is none other than the imperishable Supreme. Action is in the newborn, lively baby. Action is a gift from the Creator. Therefore, the all pervading Supreme is ever centered in all undertakings pursued by one or many people in an honest spirit of self dedication for the good of all. He who lives in unison with this wheel of action is contributing to the harmony of life. What happens to him who disobeys? एवं प्रवर्तितं चक्रं नानुवर्तयति हयः अघायुरिन्द्रिया रामो मोघं पार्थ स जीवति. Verse number 16. He who does not follow here the wheel thus set revolving is of a sinful life, rejoicing in the senses. He lives in vain, O son of Pritha. Every member in the entire kingdom of the minerals, the vegetables, and the dumb creatures instinctively follows this principle of yajna and contributes thereby to the smooth running of the universal wheel of action. Among living creatures, man alone has been allowed the freedom of action to contribute to the harmony or to bring about discord in the smooth running of this cosmic mechanism. So long as the majority of a generation manage to live abiding by the law of harmony, they shall grow from strength to strength, opening up fields of happiness for themselves. Such periods are called the golden eras of their social and cultural life. But this faithful obedience is not always possible for all of them at all times. At certain periods of history, man, as a social being, comes to revolt against this eternal law, and then life starts slipping away from its peaceful domain of constructive health growth and shatters itself in tearful ruin. Such ages are the dark ages of despair and restlessness, war and pestilence, flood and famine. The question naturally arises as to why the bright day of the world slowly sets into itself to bring in the dark night of chaos. The explanation is given here in the Gita. A community is made up of its individuals. However much we may glorify the achievements of the community as such, we cannot totally ignore the contributions made by the units constituting the community, the individuals. If the individuals are perfect, the community works smoothly. But if the units are wrongly composed, then the entire healthy growth and strength of structure in the total collapses. The individual's negative existence starts with their preoccupation with their senses, in their limited recognition that they are themselves nothing more than their body. They become preoccupied with its nourishment and fattening. As a body, they cannot perceive the higher ways of life, nor can they entertain any goal other than seeking satisfaction for their mere animal passions. In such an era, nobody would come forward to work in the redeeming noble spirit of yajna, without which no favorable circumstances reign could be created for the productive potentials, meaning devas, to manifest themselves as nourishing joy. Seekers of sense in means Indriya Ramaha, they compete among themselves, each seeking with lustful greed his own selfish happiness, and they often unconsciously bring about a discordant rhythm in the wheel of action. Such people are considered by the Gita as living in sin, and the divine song asserts they live in vain. Now, the Lord Himself supposes Arjun to ask the following questions. Is the wheel of action thus set in motion to be followed by all, or by him only who has not yet attained firm faith in the path of knowledge? यस्त्वात्मरतिरेव स्यादात्मतृप्तश्च मानवः आत्मन्येव च सन्तुष्टस्तस्य कार्यं न विद्यते. Verse number 17. But the man who rejoices only in the self who is satisfied with the self, who is constant in the self alone. For him, verily, there is nothing more to be done. The wheel of action explained above is generally applicable to the majority of seekers. The actions in the world undertaken in a spirit of yajna integrate their personality and make them more and more prepared for the highest vocation in life, meditation. Through selfless work, an individual gains an increasing amount of inner poise, and when such a single pointed mind is brought to function at the meditation seat, the meditator gains the experience of transcending his limited ego. To such a perfected one, work is not a training to purify himself, but it is a fulfillment of his own God realization. It is a fact that we are egged to the activity seeking and demanding a better satisfaction and a complete contentment. Satisfaction and contentment are the two wheels of the life chariot. In order to gain a better satisfaction and to reach nearer the point of contentment, we are goaded to act in the outer world, to earn and to save, to hoard and to spend. But the man of perfection, who on transcending his limited identification with his matter envelopments, when he gets himself ushered into the all perfect realm of the spirit, he comes to feel so satisfied with the state of selfhood that he thereby attains, that he experiences a complete sense of contentment in the very divine nature, and that provides eternal satisfaction for him. Where satisfaction and contentment have arrived, there in that bosom desires cannot arise at all, and where the desires are not, there cannot be any action. Thus, the effects karya are not possible in him. The effects of the spiritual ignorance, desires, thoughts, and actions naturally in such an individual, there cannot be any obligatory duty. All work has been at once fulfilled in him. Thereafter, he is free to act or not to act, to serve or not to serve, and lives as a God man upon the earth. Moreover, for him there is here no interest whatsoever in what is done or what is not done, nor does he depend upon any being for any object. नैव तस्य कृतेनार्थो न कृतेनेह कश्चन न चास्य सर्वभूतेषु कश्चिदर्थव्यपाश्रयः. Verse number 18. An ordinary man is whipped up to action either because of his anxiety to gain a profit or because of his fear that by not doing work he will be incurring a loss. But an individual who has the subjective experience of the spiritual stature in him, who has therefore discovered an eternal satisfaction in his own self, and who has reached perfect contentment therein, will have no more action to perform. He has nothing more to gain through activity, nor can he have any fear of losing anything in the world due to non performance of any action. Such an individual, rooted in the experience of the self and depending upon nothing, neither any being nor any object, for his joy and bliss, has discovered the subject. The objects of the world are essentially nothing other than the subject being tossed on the waves of agitations in the mind. You have not attained to the right knowledge, all pervading like the flood waters. As mentioned in second chapter, verse 46. Wherefore, तस्मादसक्तः सततं कार्यं कर्म समाचर असक्तो ह्याचरन् कर्म परमाप्नोति पूरुषः. Verse number 19. Therefore, always perform actions which should be done without attachment, for by performing action without attachment, man attains the supreme. We have already noticed that Krishna presupposes no knowledge in his friend, nor does he thrust upon Arjun bare statements that are to be blindly believed and silently swallowed by him. Proselytization is not the technique of Vedanta. Hindus are strangers to it. Every strong statement of fact is preceded by a line of logical thoughts explained at length. Till now, Krishna was explaining the wheel of action, and after exhausting the exposition of this entire theory, he, in this stanza, is crystallizing his conclusions, encouraging Arjun to act. Therefore, always perform actions which are obligatory in your present social status, in your domestic situation, as a member of your community and the nation. Even here, Krishna is repeating his warning to Arjun that he must be careful in all his activities to keep his mind away from all dangerous attachments. Attachment is equal to ego plus egocentric desires. So, without attachment means without ego, and ego prompted selfish desires. The Lord has already explained how attachments directly help to form tendencies in the mind and deepen fresh vasana impressions within. For the following reasons also, you should perform action. Verse number 20. कर्मणैव हि संसिद्धि मास्थिता जनकादयः लोकसङ्ग्रहमेवापि सम्पश्यन् कर्तुमर्हसि. Janaka and others attained perfection verily through action alone, even with a view to protecting the masses. You should perform actions. Thus, the wise kings of yore, such as Janaka and Ashwapati, had tried to attain perfection, samsiddhi, by the path of action. They were men of right understanding as they tried to liberate themselves through right actions performed in a spirit of detachment and self dedication. They had set an example to the world by their achievement through an immaculate life of service. Krishna means that Arjuna too, a prince by birth and one who has taken upon himself the entire responsibility of mobilizing and fighting the war, should respect his prarabdha and act diligently without running away from the battlefield as he had earlier intended to do. This is the only method by which he can gain a complete Vasana exhaustion in himself. Born as a king, he had a greater responsibility towards the community than any other member. Therefore, it was his duty that he should keep to his post and work diligently. A creeper will never grow in a desert. It is nature's law that every living creature finds itself in the most conducive outer world conditions. Thus viewed, because of the very fact that he had manifested himself as a son of his father in the family of kings, nature had judged that the most conducive circumstance in life for Arjun was the life of a prince, daring dangers, fighting enemies, and generally ordering peaceful and progressive growth for the society. Who should secure the welfare of the world? And how? The answer follows. Yad yada charati shreshtastattadevetaro janah sayat pramanam kurute lokastadanu vartate. Verse number 21. Whatever a great man does, that other men also do, means imitate. Whatever he sets up as the standard, that the people or world follows. Man is essentially an imitating animal. This is a psychological truth. The more rejuvenation of a society in any period of history can take place only because of the example set up by the leaders of that nation. Students can be disciplined only when teachers are well behaved. The mirror, the minor officials cannot be kind and honest when the rulers of the country are corrupt tyrants. Children's behavior depends entirely upon and is ever controlled by the standard and purity and culture of their parents. With this, Krishna raises his next argument on why Arjun should act in the world. Unless he diligently acts, the chances are that the entire community will follow the low standard of retreat from action set up by him, and thus they will ultimately invite a general decadence of culture in life. Now, to emphasize the point and to make a lasting impression upon Arjun of the teaching so far given, chapter 3, 4, chapter 3 verse 4 to 21, Lord Krishna indicates himself as an example. The Lord, though already a liberated soul, Mukta, is acting diligently, without attachment, as a model for his generation to rise up above the slothfulness of the age into vigorous activity. The very creed of Krishna is active resistance to evil. This non-violence is not the instinctive incapacity. His non-violence is not the instinctive incapacity of the daydreaming coward who cannot stand up against injustice and fight for the accepted principles of national culture. There could have been there could not have been any doubt now left in the mind of Arjun regarding the efficacy of the path of action advised to him. If you have a doubt as regards the necessity for working for the protection of the masses, why do you not observe me? Why do you not follow my example and try to prevent the masses from going astray, setting up for them an example in yourself? न मे पार्थास्ति कर्तव्यं त्रिषु लोकेषु किञ्चन नानवाप्तमवाप्तव्यं वर्त एव च कर्मणि. Verse number 22nd. 22. There is nothing in the three worlds, O Partha, that has to be done by me, nor is there anything unattained that should be attained by me. Yet I engage myself in action. Being a perfect man, a true yogi, Krishna had no more desire for achieving or gaining anything in the world. Had he wanted a kingdom all for himself, he could have easily carved out one, but he was in the battlefront only with a sense of duty towards the noble and the righteous cause the Pandavas stood for. The life of the Lord till the very moment of the Mahabharat war had been a perfect life of complete detachment, and yet, even though there was nothing he had not gained, nor had he anything further to gain, he was spending himself constantly in activity, as though work was to him a rapturous game of enthusiasm and joy. Continuing the same argument, the Lord says, Yadihaham navarteyam jatu karmanyatandritaha mama vartmanuvartante manushyaः partha sarvashah. Verse number 23. For should I not ever engage myself in action without relaxation, men would in every way follow my path, O son of Prutha. Why should the Lord work? What would be the loss to the generation if he were not to work at all? The masses always imitate their leaders and heroes in their dress, in their behavior, in their moral values, in their actions, in all the branches of their activities. They fix their measure of perfection always by watching the standard of life of their leaders. If the Lord did not continue to work without relaxation, men also would follow in his wake and sink themselves into inactivity and so into an unproductive existence. In nature, everything acts constantly and sincerely. The entire universe survives and sustains itself by activity. In these stanzas, as everywhere, all along in the Gita, the first person singular is used by Lord Krishna, not in the sense of the blue boy of Vrindavan, but as the Atman or the self-realized man of perfection. A liberated soul realizes himself to be nothing other than the spirit, upon which alone is the play of matter sustained, as the dream is sustained upon the waker. If this God principle, though inactive in itself, does not consistently serve the pluralistic phenomenal world as its permanent substratum, the world as it is now cannot exist. The ocean never rises in spite of the billows. Yet it is a fact that without the ocean, the waves cannot rise or dance. Similarly, if the Lord were not to keep on actively serving the world, the cultural life of the generations would stagnate. And what harm is there if I do not act? The Lord says, Utsideyurime lokana kuryam karma chedaham sankarasya cha karta स्यामुपहन्यामि माः प्रजाः. Verse number 24. These worlds would perish if I did not perform action. I would be the author of confusion of castes and would destroy these beings. If I do not perform action, it will not be conducive to the harmonious progress of the universe, and the entire superstructure of our scientific laws and calculations will tumble down. The universe is not a chaos, it is a cosmos. Lawlessness is not noticed anywhere in the working of the cosmic forces. The phenomenal happenings, the movement of the planets, the rhythmic dance of the seasons, the music of creation, the law of colors, and all happening in harmony, implicitly obeying the law governing them all. And this law is otherwise called the mighty power of nature or God. Lord Krishna, as an embodiment of Godhood, is declaring here, if I do not perform work, the world would perish. Scientifically viewed, this declaration is not a superstitious absurdity acceptable only to the blind believers, but it becomes a statement of fact which even the microscope gazers cannot honestly deny. The Lord represents not only the law governing the outer world of things and beings, but He is also the law that governs the inner world of thoughts and emotions. The whole human society is divided into the four castes Varna by the Hindu saints and sages on the basis of the individual's mental temperaments. In case the law governing the inner psychological temperaments is not functioning strictly, there will be confusion in behavior and instability in character. The general translation admixture of races for Varna Sankara contains a mischievous suggestion for the modern students inasmuch as they would directly understand it as a divine sanction for the caste tyrannies that are going on in the decadent Hindu society. Suppose, on the other hand, you, Arjun, think, or for that matter, any other man thinks, that one who has achieved his goal of self realization, even he should work for the welfare of the others, although for himself he may have nothing more to achieve or gain. सक्ताः कर्मण्यविद्वांसो यथा कुर्वन्ति भारत कुर्याद् विद्वांस्तथा सक्तश्चिकीर्षुर्लोकसङ्ग्रहम्. Verse number 25. As the ignorant men from attachment to action, O Bharat, so should the wise men act without attachment, wishing the welfare of the world. It is very well known that all of us act in our own given fields of activities with all enthusiasm and deep interest, all day through, every day of the year, and all through the years of our entire lifetime. An average member of society is seen to wear himself out in the strain of constant activity, irrespective of his health, careless of the severity of seasons. Through joy and sorrow, man constantly strives to earn and to hoard, to gain and to enjoy. Here, Krishna says that a man of self realization also works in the world with as much diligence and sincerity, tireless enthusiasm and energizing joy, burning hopes and scalding fears, as any ordinary man striving in the competitions of the marketplace. The only difference between the two is that while the ignorant acts and is motivated in his actions by his attachments and anxieties for the fruits, a man of godly intentions or complete peaceful perfection will work in the world without attachment only for the purpose of the redemption of the world. This subtle difference between the activities of the wise and the ignorant may not strike the modern reader as very important unless his attention is directed towards its universal application. It is the anxious desire for the fruits that dissipates the finer and nobler energies in the worker and condemns his activity to utter failure. No doubt, even a man of God, when he acts, must bring into his field of activity his own mind and intellect. The mind can function only when it is attached to something. It cannot remain alive and yet detached from everything. Detachment of the mind mentioned here is only its detachment from the false, irresistible fascination for objects, and this is gained through the process of attaching itself to the nobler. Thus, when Lord Krishna says here that the wise man should work without attachments, he immediately indicates how this can be achieved. He advises Arjun to act desirous of guiding the world Loka Sangraha. Attachment becomes a clog or a painful chain on us when only when it is extremely egocentric. To the extent we work for larger schemes to bless a vaster section of humanity, to that extent the attachment loses its poison and comes to bless the age. Many poisons serve as medicines in their diluted form, while the same in a concentrated form can bring instantaneous death. The ego and egocentric desires bind and destroy man, but to the extent he can lift his identifications to include and accommodate in it larger sections of the living world, to that extent the attachment gathers an ethical halo, a divine glow, and becomes a cure for our subjective pains and imperfections. Here, the practical method suggested is that Arjun should work unattached to his own egocentric, limited concept of himself and his relations, and he must enter into the battlefield as a champion fighting for a cause noble and righteous against the armies that have come up to question and challenge the deathless values of higher living as propounded and upheld by the Hindu culture. To such a man of wisdom who is working in society for the service of man, the following advice is given. न बुद्धिभेदं जनयेदज्ञानां संकर्मसङ्गिनां योषयेत् सर्वकर्माणि विद्वान् युक्तः समाचरन्. Verse number 26. Let no wise man unsettle the minds of ignorant people who are attached to action. He should engage them in all actions, himself fulfilling them with devotion. The chances are that when a man of equipoise and self discovery enters the field of activity, he will be tempted to advise his generation on pure ethics and abstract ideologies, The generation misunderstanding the words and emphasis of such a master might come to a wrong conclusion that to renounce activity was the direct path to truth. The teachers are warned against such a hasty guidance, which might damp the enthusiasm of the generation to act. Life is dynamic. Nobody can sit idle. Even the idle contributes to the general activity. In this ever surging onward rush of life's full impetuosity, impetuosity, if there be a foolish guide who would plunge himself in the midstream and stand with upraised hands, following to the generation to howling to the generation to halt, he would certainly be pulverized by the ever moving flood of life and its endless activities. Many a hasty master has made this mistake and has had to pay for it. Krishna is declaring here only a universal law for the guidance of the saints and sages of India, that they should not go against the spirit of the times and be a mere revolt against life's own might and power. In this stanza is given out the art of guiding mankind, which can be used by every leader in all societies, be they social workers or political masters or cultural teachers. A society that is functioning in a particular line of activity at any given period of history should not be all of a sudden arrested in its flow, says Krishna. The leader should fall in line with the generation and slowly and steadily guide it to act in the right direction by his own example. A traveler motoring with the idea of going to Haridwar may miss his way and speed down towards Saharanpur. But the way to guide him back to the main road is not to halt him, because by halting he will never reach his own destination or any other goal. So long as the wheels are not revolving on the road, distances are not covered. Keeping the wheels on the move, he has to change the direction of his movements until he comes to his right path, heading towards Haridwar. Similarly, man should act, and even if he be acting in the wrong direction, through action alone can he come to the right path of diviner activities and gain the fulfillment of his perfection. No wise man should unsettle his generation's firm faith in action. He must himself diligently perform the ordinary actions in a diviner and better fashion, and he must make himself an example to the world, so that the lesser folk may automatically imitate him and learn to follow his unfailing footsteps. In what way is an ignorant man attached to action? प्रकृते क्रियमाणानि गुणैः कर्माणि सर्वशः अहङ्कारविमूढात्मा कर्ताहमिति मन्यते. Verse number 27. All actions are performed in all cases merely by the qualities of in nature gunas. The he whose mind is deluded by egoism thinks, I am the doer. All along, Krishna has been insisting that nobler actions are actions without attachment. This is easier said than done. even if one intellectually accepts this idea. It is not at all easy for him to act up to it. To every one of us, the difficulty is that we know how to get ourselves detached from our activities and still act on in the field. The Lord gives here a method of discrimination by which we can easily develop the required amount of detachment. We had explained earlier how spiritual ignorance expresses itself at the intellectual level as desires, which again in the mental zone manifests as thoughts, and the very thoughts colored by our mental tendencies, sattva, raja, and tamas, manifest themselves in their fulfillment in the outer world of objects. As our actions, thus the tendencies of the mind, vasanas, express in the outer world as actions. Where there are noble thoughts, there noble actions manifest. When the thoughts are agitated, the actions also are uncertain, faltering, and confused. And when the thoughts are dull and animalistic, the actions generated from them are correspondingly base, vicious, and cruel. Thus, the mind's projections in the outer world are in fact a kind of crystallization of the mental vasana among the objects of the world, and in there constitute the actions, and these constitute the actions. These actions are therefore generated by the mind, strengthened in the mind, and ultimately performed with the mind. But the individual, due to his wrong identification with his own mind, gets the false notion that he himself is the actor, the doer. This action arrogating ego naturally starts feeling an anxiety for its success and a burning detachment for the result of its actions. In a dream, we create a world of our own and we identify ourselves with the world so made. And this identifier is called the dreamer. We all know that the sorrows of the dream all belong to the dreamer and to no one else. The dreamer is liberated from his pains when he ends his identification with the dream kingdom. Similarly, the actions in the world outside, which are nothing other than the vasanas existing in one's own mind, cannot of themselves give one any attachment, but the attachment is felt by one who gets identified with one's own mental conditions. The moment one understands this simple fact, all one's attachments end, and therefore one lives in perfect peace. This identification with the mental condition creates the false sense of ego, which arrogates to itself the idea, I am the doer. The doer demands the fruits of his actions. To get over this attachment is to end this misconception. But as regards the wise man, तत्त्ववित्तु महाबाहो गुणकर्मविभागयोः गुणागुणेषु वर्तन्त इति मत्वा न सज्जते. Verse number 28. But he who knows the truth, O mighty armed, about the divisions of the qualities and their functions, and he who knows that gunas as senses move amidst gunas as objects is not attached. As a contrast to the point of view of the ignorant man explained in the last stanza, Krishna explains here the attitude of the wise man when he plows the field of activity. In him, attachment has no place because of his constant discriminating understanding that in all activities it is his mind that projects out to form the action. When once the wise man has realized that actions belong to the world of the mind, he is no more anxious for the fruits thereof. Success and failure thereafter belong to the mind and not to him. Likes and dislikes thereafter are of the mind and not his. Love and hatred are not his but of the mind. Thus, in complete inner freedom, the God man functions as a true sportsman in his play field, where the very enjoyment is in the sport and not in the score. Here, Arjun is addressed as the mighty armed, and this is very significant in the mouth of Krishna at this moment. The very term reminds us of Arjun's wondrous heroism as the greatest archer of his time. The application is that a true hero is not one who can face an army and kill a few, but one who can save himself. A true warrior is only he who can tirelessly fight in the inner world and gain a victory over his own mind and attachments. One who can act in the world's battlefield of actions, ever rolling over and never surrendering to the arrows of attachments that fly towards one from all directions, is the real immortal hero who can thereafter sit unarmed on the chariots of mortal heroes and without raising any weapon can guide the destinies of many an army in every Kurukshetra. That master hero is called Tattvavit, one who knows the reality, the self. Now, प्रकृतेर्गुणसम्मूढाः सज्जन्ते गुणकर्मसु तान् कृत्स्नविदो मन्दान् कृत्स्नविन्न विचालयेत्. Verse number 29. Those deluded by the qualities of nature, means gunas, are attached to the functions of the qualities. The man of perfect knowledge should not unsettle the foolish who are of imperfect knowledge. Although many knows that all actions are the attempts of the mental impressions to fulfill themselves in the outer world, only the perfect one realizes this truth and generally becomes quiet and unattached in all his activities. The majority of us are in a state of complete delusion and are entirely victimized by our own mental temperaments. The flood of life surging out through these existing vasana channels should not be blockaded in the activity. The advice given by Krishna in the outer stanza, number 26, is again for the purpose of emphasis, repeated here in different words. The dull-witted one, unconsciously victimized by his own mental impressions, acts in the world outside, shackled by 1,000 burning attachments. A sage or a saint should not come into the arena of life to decay such a man's activity all of a sudden. Krishna's suggestion is that while feeding the fire of life, he should carefully guide its flow into the right channel, wherein the flood of life can reach to water the gardens of cultural development in the individual as well as in the community. How then should actions be performed by the ignorant man who seeks liberation from his own sense of finitude when he is qualified only for action? The answer follows. मयि सर्वाणि कर्माणि सन्न्यस्याध्यात्मचेतसा निराशीर्निर्ममो भूत्वा युध्यस्व विगतज्वरः. Verse number 30. Renouncing all actions in me, with the mind centered on the self, free from hope and egoism, means ownership, free from mental fever, you do fight. It has been clearly declared that the divine opinion of the Lord is that Arjun should fight. The Pandava prince is not at present fit for the higher contemplative life of pure meditation. Action has a tendency to create new impressions, which again procreate impulses to act more vigorously. In order to avoid creation of new asanas, even while acting for the purpose of vasana exhaustion, Krishna had already advised the method of acting without the spirit of ego or egocentric desires. The same theory is explained here while expounding a technique by which this consummation can actually be brought about. Renounce all actions in me. We have already noticed that by the first person pronoun, Krishna means the Supreme Self, the Divine, the Eternal. Renouncing all activities unto Him with a mind soaked with devoted remembrances of the Self, Adhyatma Chetasa. The Lord advises Arjuna to act on. Renunciation of action does not mean an insipid life of inactivity. Actions performed through attachment and desires are renounced the moment we take away from action the egocentric and the selfish stink. A serpent is dangerous only as long as its fangs are not removed. The moment these are taken out, even the most poisonous reptile becomes a tame creature incapable of harming anyone. Similarly, action gives rise to bondage only when it is performed with a heart laden with selfish desires. Actions performed without desires are not actions at all, inasmuch as they are incapable of producing any painful reactions. Here, the renunciation of action only means the giving up of the wrong motives behind the actions. The purification of the motives is possible only when the mind is made to sing constantly the divine songs praising the glories of the self. In the song of truth, the heart begins to throb with the highest divine impulses. Actions performed in the outer world by such an individual are no more the ordinary actions, but they become expressions of the supreme will through that individual. When the limited ego is replaced by the constant feeling of the Lord as I am the Supreme, Such an individual becomes the most efficient instrument for the expressions of the divine will. Not only is it sufficient that we renounce thus all wrong actions, but we have also to make a few adjustments in our inner instruments in order to bring out an unobstructed flow of the Creator's will through us. These are indicated here by the two terms without hope and without ego. A superficial study of stanza is sure to confuse the student and drive him to the dangerous conclusion that Hinduism preaches not a dynamic conscious life but an insentient existence through life in a spirit of cultivated hopelessness. But a closer study of the import of these two terms will make us understand clearly that in this stanza, Krishna is hinting at a great psychological truth of life. Without hope, hope is the expectation of a happening that is yet to manifest and mature in a future period of time. Whatever be the hope, it belongs not to the present, it refers to a period not yet born. Without ego, the egocentric concept of ourselves is nothing but a bundle of happenings and achievements of ours which took place or were gained in the past moments. Ego is therefore the shadow of the past and it has an existent reality only with reference to the dead moments of the past. If hope is thus the child of the unborn future, ego is the lingering memory of a dead past. To reveal in ego and hope is to attempt on our part to live either with the dead moments of the past or with the unborn moments of the future. All the while, the tragedy is that we miss the present, the active, dynamic present, which is the only noble chance that is given to us to create, to advance, to achieve, and to enjoy. Krishna advises Arjun, therefore, to act renouncing both hope and ego. And this is indeed a primary instruction on how to pour the best that is in us into the present, blockading all unintelligent and thoughtless dissipation of our inner personality energies in the past and the future. The instruction is so exhaustive in vision and complete in its minutest details that the stanza under review should be a surprise even to the best of our modern psychologists. Even though the technique so far advised can and does avoid all vestige of energy among the funeral pyres of the dead moments and in the wombs of unborn time, yet there is a chance for the man of action wasting his potentialities in the very present. This generally comes through our inborn nature to get ourselves unnecessarily over anxious during our present activities. The feverish anxiety is indicated here by the term fever, jwara. Krishna advises that Arjun should renounce all actions into the Lord and getting rid of both hope and selfishness must fight free from all mental fever. How complete this technique is will be evident now to all students of the Gita. The term fight is to be understood here as our individual fight with circumstances in the silent battle of life. Thus, the advice is not for Arjun alone, but to all men who would like to have live life fully and intelligently. The advice contained in this stanza reads as though quite unorthodox for those who have read the Vedas with a limited meaning for its term Karma Yoga. In order to hammer this new interpretation of the Vedic truth into the acceptance of his generation, the Lord says, Ye me matamidam nityam anutiष्ठन्ति manavaha श्रद्धावन्तो न सूयन्तो मुच्यन्ते तेऽपि कर्मभिः. Verse number 31. Those men who constantly practice this teaching of mine, full of faith and without cavilling, they too are freed from actions. It is clearly brought out here that the above technique can bless us not by a mere study of it, but only when it has been properly practiced in life. The term religion, matam, in Sanskrit means opinion. This is Krishna's opinion, Shri Krishna's matam. The philosophy of spirituality is universal and therefore the same everywhere. But religions differ from prophet to prophet, for there are many different opinions entertained by these different masters regarding the best manner by which their particular generation could be guided towards the final experience of the eternal factor. One ought not to live through life as a mere beast of burden, doing its daily routine and sweating under the driver's whip. Work only hardens the muscles, it can smoothen out the ugly wrinkles in our character and add a glow of health and vitality to our inner personality. Only when we bring the inner equipments of our heart and head into the work which our hands and legs perform in the outer world. This is accomplished by pursuing the Karma Yoga advised earlier with full faith, Shraddha, and without cavilling, Anasuyantaha. Faith, Shraddha, is a very pregnant word in Sanskrit which refuses to be defined fully by any single word in English. But Shankara's explanation of Shraddha has a purely intellectual import and it has no direct emotional appeal for the seeker. Faith in Vedanta means the ability to digest mentally and comprehend intellectually the full import of the advice of the saints and the declarations of the scriptures. In fact, without faith, no activity is ever possible, and faith cannot grow where intellectual conviction has not come to play in full blaze. Without cavilling, anasuyantaha. A mere intellectual theory cannot be understood and appreciated without our adverse criticisms of it. We criticize to know and understand more exhaustively a piece of knowledge. But here, Krishna is advising a technique of living which cannot fulfill itself in our life through mere criticism and questioning. Krishna is warning Arjun that he will neither understand fully nor come to gain the blessings of that way of life by deep study and noisy discussions. It can be understood and experienced only by living it. They too are freed from work. Immature students of the Gita have been seen to cool down in their enthusiasm when they meet with the use of such terms. All through the chapter, Krishna was insisting that man should act diligently and rightly. All of a sudden, he points to a strange looking goal, worklessness. Naturally, an intelligent reader immediately comes to feel a disgust at this ugly paradox. This is mainly because of our lack of appreciation of the term in which native scriptural in its native scriptural import. Earlier, we have explained how the ignorance of our spiritual nature gives rise to desires, which in their turn cause thought agitations, and how work is nothing other than thoughts fulfilled among the sense objects. Thus, the state of worklessness is itself the state of thoughtlessness, which indicates the condition of desirelessness. Absence of all desires can come only when we rediscover the all full nature of the self. In short, with the knowledge of the self, when spiritual ignorance is terminated, desires can no more arise. Thus, the term freed from work indicates the state beyond ignorance or the state of selfhood. This supreme state, no doubt, can never be reached purely through work. Street is not the parliament, but having reached Parliament Street, the parliament cannot be very far away. One cannot miss reaching the parliament there. Similarly, Karma Yoga is extolled here as the path that takes one ultimately to the Supreme, because through desireless activity one achieves vasana purgation, thus making the mind pure and subtler for meditative purposes. Contrasted with the above, Sri Krishna explains what happens to those who carp at this theory of right action. ये त्वेतदभ्यसूयन्तो नानुतिष्ठन्ति मे मतं सर्वज्ञानविमूढांस्तान् विद्धि नष्टान् चेतसः. Verse number 32. But those who carp at my teaching and do not practice it, deluded in all knowledge and devoid of discrimination, know them to be doomed to destruction. Those who decry this great teaching of mine and do not practice it, Krishna warns his students, will become more and more deluded and will lose their discrimination. Man is encouraged to follow a life of action only when he comes to appreciate that way of life completely in his understanding. When the very theory is decried, it is no longer conducive to the intellect to accept it. Thus, decrying a philosophy is a sign of one's intellectual rejection of it. Having once rejected intellectually, there is no chance of an individual ever striving to live that philosophy. Karma Yoga is a way of life and we have to live it if we want to come under its grace. The path of work lies through a process of elimination of the desires in us. When the ego and egocentric desires are eliminated, the work accomplished through such an individual is the true divine action, which is destined to having enduring achievements. To the extent man is not practicing this efficient way of work, he would grow necessarily unintelligent, and to that extent his discriminative capacity will deteriorate and ultimately get destroyed. The blessings because of which man is considered superior to animals is his divine faculty of discrimination. An intellect strengthened by its own intrinsic capacity to distinguish between the real and the unreal, the right and the wrong, is the mighty instrument of self development in man. When this instrument is destroyed, man comes to behave in no better way than a biped animal panting on the path of existence, bullied by its own lower instincts of miserable passions and low appetites. Naturally, he fails to make any true gain out of his life's chances and finally destroys himself. Then why do not men follow this doctrine and free perform their duties fully? Why should they follow others or act on their own? In disobeying Krishna, why are they not afraid of transgressing the Lord's commands? The Lord says, Sadrusham cheshtate swasyah prakrutirjnanavanapi prakrutim yanti bhutani nigraha kim karishyati. Verse number 33. Even a wise man acts in accordance with his own nature. Beings will follow their own nature. What can restraint do? Even the man of knowledge acts in conformity with his own nature, which is determined by the pattern of thoughts that arise in him. At any given instant of time, each one of us is determined by the thoughts that are in us at that moment, and the thoughts in us always get patternized by the channels of thinking designed by the thoughts which we had entertained in the past. The nature of each individual is decided by the style of thinking which each is capable of. The man of knowledge mentioned here indicates one who has read and understood thoroughly the technique of action as explained in this chapter. Even when he knows the technique, the Lord says that it is not easy for him to follow it because his mind is designed to carry his thoughts through egocentric and selfish channels, ever panting to gain some desires. Because of these past impressions, vasanas, even an honest student finds it hard to practice this simple looking technique in his life. The reason is quite universal. Beings follow their own nature. Naturally, what can restraint do when nature is too powerful? This last statement of in the stanza, what can restraint do, is not a cry of despair in Krishna's philosophy. It is the honest, all seeing vision of the philosopher in Krishna who recognizes that the higher ways of living are not meant for all. Men crowding on the lowest rungs of the evolutionary ladder, overwhelmed by their own animal passions, find themselves incapable of renouncing them and are therefore incapacitated to walk the path of action. It is only a slightly evolved entity, full of enthusiasm, activity, and a passion for progress, Rajoguna, who can follow this sacred path and benefit himself. This honest confession shows the broad mindedness and tolerance in Krishna, the universal teacher. In every being acts only according if every being acts only in according to his own nature, and there is none that has not a nature of his own, then there is no scope for personal exertion and the teaching becomes purposeless. The Lord explains as follows. इन्द्रियस्येन्द्रियस्यार्थे रागद्वेषौ व्यवस्थितौ तयोर्नवशमागच्छेत् तौ यस्य परिपन्थिनौ. Verse number 34. Attachment and aversion for the objects of the senses abide in the senses. Let none come under their sway, for they are his foes. In the last stanza, it is said that even a man well read in the Shastras cannot easily follow the highly ethical life which is demanded of a spiritual seeker because his lower nature proves too strong for him. Prescribing a medicine which is not available is not the art of healing. It is the philosopher's duty not only to indicate the weaknesses in our present life and the state of perfection, but he must also show us ways and means by which we can transport ourselves from our weaknesses into this ideal state of perfection. Then and then alone can the philosopher bless his generation. Krishna indicates here the great robber in the within of man, which loots away the true joys and thrills of right living. Attachments and aversions of the sense organs for their respective sense objects are instinctive and natural in everyone. The sense objects by themselves are incapable of bringing any wave of sorrow or agitation into the within. We get agitated and disturbed not at our sense organs but in our mind. The mind gets disturbed because when the stimuli reach the mind, it accepts in its inherent mischief certain types of stimuli as good and their opposites as bad. Therefore, it gets attached to the stimuli it experiences as good and develops an aversion for the opposite type of stimuli. Now the mind is prepared to suffer the agonies of existence in the sorrowful plurality. Whenever it comes in contact with the infinite number of objects outside, it pants to court the things of its own attachment and labors to run away from the things of its own aversion. This excitement of the mind is truly its tragedy. Having stated this truth, Krishna advises all seekers let none come under their sway. The philosophy of Gita does not suggest, even in its implications, any kind of running away from the world of sense objects. Krishna's creed is to live here and now, in the midst of situations in life, in this very world, and to experience them through our sacred vehicles of the body, mind, and intellect. The only insistence is that on all occasions a wise man should be a master of the vehicles and not a helpless victim of these matter envelopments. And the secret of this mastery in life is to live free from the tyrannies of attachments and aversions. In order to detach ourselves from both our likes and dislikes, we have to get rid of our false egocentric vanities. Likes and dislikes belong to the ego. Therefore, all egoless acts, as we have explained earlier, accomplish a purgation of vasanas. Vasanas create the mind. Where the mind is, there reveals the ego. To the extent the vasanas have been reduced, to that extent the mind has become non existent. Where the mind has ended, there the reflection of the consciousness called the ego has also ended. The methods by which we can bring about the vasana purgation are explained in the following. श्रेयान् स्वधर्मो विगुणः परधर्मात् स्वनुष्ठितात् स्वधर्मे निधनं श्रेयः परधर्मो भयावहः. Verse number 35. Better is one's own duty, though devoid of merit, than the duty of another well discharged. Better is death in one's own duty. The duty of another is fraught with fear, is productive of positive danger. The word dharma in Sanskrit is the most elusive word for translation into English. It is used generally in more than one definite meaning. Terms like righteousness, good conduct, duty, noble quality, etc. are some of them. We have explained it earlier and found how dharma essentially means the law of being of anything in the world, that which determines one man's personality as distinctly different from another's. It is very well known. It is the texture of the thoughts entertained by him. This texture of his thoughts is again, in its turn, determined by the pattern of thinking vasanas which his mind has gained from its own past. These predetermined channels of thinking created by one's own earlier ways of thinking are called the vasanas. The compelling deep urges in us, gathered in our past fields of action, that now determine our present emotional profile, are the vasanas. Thus, dharma should be conceived here as the vasanas in our mind. For no other explanation will be correct, since the very discussion now is upon mental control. The word duty used by us in our translation is in its special sense to be understood as vasanas, swadharma and paradharma. Swadharma is not the duty which accrues to an individual because of his caste, which is ever a sheer accident of birth. It is right imports in its right import. Swadharma means the type of vasanas that one discovers in one's own mind. To act according to one's own taste, inborn and natural, is the only known method of living in peace and joy, in success and satisfaction. To act against the grain of one's own vasanas would be acting in terms of paradharma, and that this is fraught with danger is very well known. In the context of the Gita, there is a direct message for Arjun. Arjun is born a prince, trained in the art of war, and has exhibited in his life his insatiable thirst for heroism and adventure. Naturally, his swadharma is that of a prince, and that can find fulfillment only in dangerous actions and endless exertions. Perhaps, as it was evident in the first chapter, Prince Arjun had gathered during his early education that the life of renunciation and meditation, the life of a Brahmin, was nobler than his own life. Therefore, he wanted to run away from the battlefield into the silent caves of meditation. In this stanza, Krishna reminds him that to act according to his own vasanas, even imperfectly, is the right path for his development. It is dangerous to suppress his own personality expression and copy the activities of someone else, even if he be living a nobler and diviner life. Though the source of evil has been pointed out earlier in chapter 2, verse 62, and chapter 3, verse 34, yet with a view to eliciting and a concise and clear statement of what was but Desultorily and vaguely expressed, Arjun asks, अर्जुन उवाच अथ केन प्रयुक्तोऽयं पापञ्चरति पूरुषः अनिच्छन्नपि वार्ष्णेय बलादिव नियोजितः. Verse number 36. Arjun said, but impelled by what does man commit sin, though against his wishes? O Varshnaya, constrained as it were by force. Following the tradition of the scriptures, the disciple now asks a definite question upon the very theme of the discussion. The very question shows that Arjun has, to a large extent, got out of the hasty conclusions which he exhibited until the beginning of the second chapter. He has become introspective and therefore conscious of certain forces working within himself that were ruining and obstructing the play of his own higher impulses. The doubt is couched in such familiar words that it appears as though it is a doubt raised by some student of our own times. There is no living man who has not in himself a sufficiently clear conception of the good and meritorious. Everyone understands intellectually what is right, but it is only when it comes to action that one invariably gets tempted to do the wrong. This paradoxical confusion between one's ideology and one's own actions becomes quite a big problem to all those who try to introspect and review themselves. The divine in us, with its nobler aspirations, wants to fulfill itself with its higher impulses and subtler achievements, but the animal instinct in us tempts us away, and we walk the path of the baser joys of the flesh. This invariably happens even against our own wishes. Arjun is inquiring of the Lord, what is the exact nature of this Satan in our bosom, which thus systematically loots away the good in us? Varshnaya is the name of Lord Krishna, meaning one born in the family of the Vrishnis. The Lord says, listen, I shall tell you who that enemy is, of whom you ask, who is the source of all evil. श्रीभगवानुवाच काम एष क्रोध एष रजो गुणसमुद्भवः महाशनो महापाप्मा विद्येन वैरिणम्. The blessed Lord said, verse number 37, the blessed Lord said, it is desire, it is anger, born of active, all devouring, all sinful, born of the active. Know this as the foe here in this world. It is desire, it is wrath. Wrath or wrath. Desire is the inner Satan in the individual's bosom. We have seen earlier that desire is nothing other than our own spiritual ignorance expressing itself in our intellectual personality. This statement in the stanza is not to be understood as enumerating two different things. Desire itself, under certain circumstances, gains expression as anger. A constant agitation of the mind, expressing as an uncontrollable impatience to gain something, is called desire. Desire is generally for something other than ourselves. In the clash of existence, beings and circumstances may come between ourselves and the object of our desire, and in such cases, our desire impulses striking at the obstacle gain the ugly look of wrath. Thus, whenever emotions for acquisition and possession of an object flow incessantly towards that object, the bundle of thoughts so flowing is called desire, while the same emotions, when they get obstructed from reaching their desired objects and get refracted at an intermediate obstacle, are called anger. This desire, anger, emotion is the very Satan in us that compels us to compromise with our own intellectually known higher values of existence and tempts us to perpetrate sins. Greater the desire, greater the power in the pull towards the sinful and the low. Once desire has come to manifest itself in our intellect, it enshrouds the wisdom in us. Desire and anger and their numberless children of sin and sorrow must ever come to breed upon the marshy lands of our deluded intellect. To come under their sway is ignorance, to come to rule over them is wisdom. The Lord now illustrates how desire is our foe and how it veils our discrimination. धूमेनाव्रियते वह्निर्यथादर्शो मलेन च यथोल्बेनावृतो गर्भस्तथा तेनेदमावृतम्. Verse number 38. As fire is enveloped by smoke, as a mirror by dust, as an embryo by the womb, so this wisdom is enveloped by that desire or anger. Three different examples have been given to illustrate how desires and the consequent anger delude our rational capacity and choke our discrimination. Repetition is an unpardonable crime against the scriptural style, and the Gita faithfully follows the immortal style common to all Bibles of the world. There is no redundancy or wasteful repetition in the divine song. With this understanding, when we try to read the stanza, we find that there are subtle implications in the three different illustrations used by the Lord. More is meant here than meets the eye. The discrimination in man is screened off and obstructed in its exercise due to the attachment in his mind for the ever changing worldly objects. We all know that our attachments to things can fall under three distinct categories. Our desires can either be low and vicious, mind for the craving fleshy carnal pleasures, or our ambitions may be for an active exertion in order to achieve power and wealth, to gain strength and might, to win fame and glory. There can also be a burning aspiration to strive and to achieve a diviner perfection and a godly self illumination. Thus, our desires can fall under three headings according to the quality of the attachment: inert tamasic or active rajasic, or noble and divine sattvic. The veilings that are created over our discrimination by these different types of qualities or gunas are indicated here by the three different examples. As fire by smoke. A smoky fireplace shrouded by dark curling smoke can sometimes, if not totally, at least partially, veil the brilliance of the light emitted by the flames. A wick without a chimney is less bright than with a chimney. Proving the example under review, even sattvic desires veil the infinite glory of the spirit as dust on a mirror. This illustrates the veiling caused by agitations that cover the purer intellect due to our thick desires for glory and power, rajasic. Compared with the former, this is indeed more complete, and the removal of it is naturally more difficult. The smoke rolls off even at a passing whiff of breeze, while the mirror cannot be cleaned even by a storm. It can be polished only by our own efforts or at dusting it clean with the help of a clean, dry duster. Through the smoke, however thick it might be, the fire can be perceived. Through the dust, if it be thick, no reflection at all can be seen in the mirror. If at all seen, it will only be dim. As the fetus in the womb. This is an illustration to show how completely the diviner aspect in us is screened off by the low animal appetites and the vulgar desires for the sensuous. The fetus is covered by the womb until it matures, and there is no method of observing it as long as it is in the womb. The veiling is complete and it can drop off only after a definite period. Similarly, the desires for the fleshy enjoyments build, as it were, a womb around the discriminating power in us, and such low mental preoccupations, those are tamasic, can drop off only after a long period of evolutionary growth undergone by such a deluded mind and intellect. In the true scriptural style, Krishna thus distinguishes between the different textures in the veils that come to cover the soul when the individual is entertaining different types of desires. In short, desire is that which hides the divine in us. In this stanza, it is not clearly stated which covers what the literal translation of the words as they stand in this couplet only says, so is this covered by it. The two pronouns it and this are defined in the following stanza, and therein we find an explanation of both. आवृतं ज्ञानमेतेन ज्ञानिनो नित्यवैरिणा कामरूपेण कौन्तेय दुष्पूरेणानलेन च. Verse number 39. Enveloped, O son of Kunti, is wisdom by this constant enemy of the wise in the form of desire, which is difficult to appease. This stanza vividly explains to us that discrimination, jnana, the capacity to distinguish the real from the unreal, the permanent from the impermanent, the true from the false, which gives man his higher status in the scale of evolution, is the divine faculty that gets screened off from us due to our own greedy and insatiable desires. In Mahabharata, desire is described as insatiable. Desires can never be satiated by the gratification of desires. The more they are enjoyed, the more they grow, as fire by the pouring of ghee, clarified butter, into it. The pronouns in the previous stanza now stand clearly elucidated. The discriminative capacity in us, it, idam, gets screened off by the satiable desires by this, tena. He now tells us which are the seeds of desire which, by enveloping wisdom, forms the enemy of the whole world. The seed of the enemy being known, it is easy to kill it. Indriyani mano buddhirasyaadhishthanamuchyate etairvimohayatyesha jnanamavrutya dehinam. Verse number 40. The senses, the mind, and the intellect are said to be its seat. Through these, it deludes the embodied by veiling his wisdom. As a true soldier, Arjuna understands that there is an inner enemy called desire, which, like an efficient saboteur, undermines the wealth and security of his inner kingdom. And as a true prince, the royal demand of Arjuna is for immediate information as to the exact hideout of this dangerous bandit. Krishna, as the spiritual teacher, has to indicate to his adventurous student where exactly the den of this devil is, from where he plans his nefarious activities. Indicating the secret fortresses of this inner enemy, desire, the Lord says, the senses, the mind, and the intellect are said to be its seats of action. A true criminal functioning as an efficient leader of a gang operating in a large area will generally have more places than one to function from. Three main offices from where desire in different forms functions to destroy the peace and health of our inner life have been indicated here very clearly. The sense organs functioning without restraint in the world of sense objects are a very convenient theatre for desire to function in. When the external stimuli reach the mind through the sense organs, the mind also becomes a breeding center of sorrows created by desire. Lastly, the intellect working and playing with the memories of the sense enjoyments it had lived and of the mental attachments it had entertained becomes yet another safe den for desire to function from. The deluded ego, foolishly identifying with the body, desires sense enjoyments. Thoughtlessly identifying with the mind, it thirsts to experience more and more emotional satisfactions. Lastly, identifying with the intellect, it plans to relive the remembered experiences of sense enjoyments and mental joys. To hunt for desire in these three hideouts is to come at last face to face with it. How finally to overcome this inner enemy is described in the following stanzas. Tasma tvamindriyaण्यादौ niyamya bharatarshava papmanam prajahihyenam jnana vijnana nasanam. Verse number 41. Therefore, O best of Bharats, controlling first the senses, kill this sinful thing, the destroyer of knowledge and wisdom. As indicated earlier, Krishna declares the truth only when he has exhausted all the logical arguments leading to it. After giving all the arguments, he summarizes here. Therefore, restrain the senses first. so that you may finally throw overboard the inner enemy desire. Desire is called sinful since in its grosser manifestations it tends to make us live and work satisfying our lower nature and thus persuades us to live a lower devolutionary life. Even at its best, sattvic, like the smoke that covers the fire, desire does not allow the full dawn of the infinite, which is the self in us. Thus, desire in all its textures contributes to the sins of man, and therefore it is styled here as the sinful thing. It is easy for a doctor to prescribe a medicine for my wound and promise me an immediate healing. It is indeed consoling to have the prescription in my hand, but I am sure I will never gain a cure if the prescription requires me to prepare an ointment out of sky flowers. Similarly, it is quite a dignified advice for a spiritual master to declare, control the senses and cast off the desires, O man. But unless the teacher gives us a method by which we can get this prescription dispensed, it will be as useless as the sky flower treatment for my painful wound. Where should one take one's stand and cast off the desires? The answer follows. Indriyani paranyahurindriyebhyah param manah manasastu para buddhiryo buddhaih paratastu saha. Verse number 42. They say that the senses are superior to the body. Superior to the senses is the mind. Superior to the mind is the intellect. One who is even superior to the intellect is he, the Atman. This and the following stanza, with which Vyasa concludes the third chapter of his incomparable Gita, give every seeker a perfect technique by which he can bring out a successful hunting and capture his inner enemy desire. Although we cannot expect in the Bhagavad Gita, especially in one of the very opening chapters, an exhaustive treatment of the technique of meditation, yet we find that in these stanzas the Lord has etched out a complete outline of the scheme for self discovery. Compared with the objects of the world, we can easily understand that the sense organs are more sacred and divine. On the instruments that constitute our physical structure, certainly the sense organs are subtler than the organs of action. Every one of us can easily experience that our mind controls and orders our sense organs, and therefore we know that the mind is subtler than the indriyas. No doubt the mind has a vast kingdom to roam about in, but even so, it has its own limitations and fixed frontiers. From knowledge to knowledge, we extend the frontiers of our mind, and all along this aggressive march of new conquest, it is the intellect that first crosses the existing frontiers of the mind and wins for it the neighboring kingdoms of fresh knowledge. In this sense, the intellect has a greater pervasiveness than the mind, and therefore it is conceived of as being subtler than the mind. That which lies beyond the intellect is called the Supreme, the Atman. The consciousness in man which lights up the very intellectual ideas in him must necessarily be subtler than the intellect itself. In the Upanishads, it has been finally declared that there is nothing subtler than the self, the Atman. The technique of meditation lies in the conscious withdrawal of all our identifications with our body, mind, and intellect. Read Swamiji's Meditation and Life, where he has indicated a complete set of exercises by which the seeker can gain a certain amount of dexterity in the art of meditation. All efforts end when we have thus gathered our entire awareness from its delusory preoccupations and made it live in itself as itself, an objectless awareness. The goal gained by pursuing this art of meditation is explained in the following. एवं बुद्धेः परं बुद्ध्वा संस्तभ्यात्मानमात्मना जहि शत्रुं महाबाहो कामरूपं दुरासदम्. Verse number 43. Thus, knowing him who is superior to intellect and restraining the self by the self, slay you, O mighty armed, the enemy in the form of desire, no doubt hard indeed to conquer. With this stanza, not only does the chapter conclude, but the special advice demanded by Arjun has also been finally given. Through knowledge alone is ignorance ended. Through a lived experience of the self alone can we end our ignorance of the self. This spiritual ignorance we have already found creates desires. The Lord has indicated earlier that desire functions and thrives in the fields of the sense organs, the mind, and the intellect. Through the processes of meditation, when we withdraw from our false identifications with the objects, the mind, body, and the mind, the desire faculty that was till now roaming about and functioning in the outer fields is gathered and established in the intellect. As long as we maintain in ourselves the limiting adjuncts of the matter envelopments, so long we cannot realize our divine potentialities. Instead, in our delusion, we will understand ourselves to be nothing more than the little ego. Limited, bound, finite, and ever sobbing. After the rediscovery of our own diviner existence, we will be able to live restraining the self by the self. In a perfect Buddha's life, his ego functions completely under the control of the diviner in him, no more than can the desire impulses, if at all they arise in the mind, play their mischiefs and bring about any devastation in his inner life. It is very interesting to note that the philosophy of the Gita preaches a constructive reorganization of life and not the destruction or rejection of life's possibilities. Desire being a painful leprous oozing wound, we are lovingly advised about a balm to cure this malady and to live thereafter in all efficiency as a master of circumstances and a lord of our own emotions. A seeker who has accomplished this in himself is called a God man, a sage, a prophet. Thus, in the Upanishads of the glorious Bhagavad Gita, in the science of the eternal, in the scripture of yoga, in the dialogue between Sri Krishna and Arjuna, The third discourse ends entitled The Karma Yoga. This chapter is called Karma Yoga. The term yoga means the act of connecting the lower with the higher through a technique consisting of one's own self evolution. Any method by which the lower in us is educated and trained to live a higher way of life. Herein we gain a more effective control upon both our life without and life within is called yoga. Here is a method of self development pointed out to the Arjun type of men who, fully armed and standing on the battlefield of life, facing an array of opposing forces, more powerful, better organized, and well supplied with equipments, are ready to fight and destroy them. In fact, every honest man in life is to a large extent, be he a fool, be he a saint, and Arjun facing his problems with hesitations, wanting to run away, and yet not daring to do so. The training of Karma Yoga prepares us for the greater fights on life's battlefields. Om, 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 Om तत्सदिति श्रीमद्भगवद्गीतासु उपनिषत्सु ब्रह्मविद्यायां योगशास्त्रे श्रीकृष्णार्जुनसंवादे कर्मयोगो नाम तृतीयोऽध्यायः। हरि ओम श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः। हरि ओम श्री चिन्मय सद्गुरवे नमः। श्रीकृष्णार्पणमस्तु।